Blue Bossa is a great jazz standard to learn and a common jam session tune. So how can you get good at playing Blue Bossa and other jazz standards like it? Let's go over it. So step number one when learning any jazz standard is to learn the melody. And the melody of Blue Bossa sounds like this. So of course the question is, how do you go about learning a melody? First of all, it's important to say that I do not recommend you actually read the notation of a melody to learn it. There are so many benefits as far as memorizing it for the long term, but also strengthening your ears, which is your most valuable improvisation asset that comes about when you learn a melody by ear. So the first thing I would do is open up Spotify or YouTube, but in this case we'll do Spotify, and type in Blue Bossa. Then you click on songs, and what will come up is a bunch of different versions of Blue Bossa recorded by different artists. At this point, it's important that you get really familiar with Blue Bossa and what it sounds like, so create a playlist, and while you're doing things around your house or driving in the car, continuously have this playlist going on in the background, doing what I call passive listening, so that you're getting really intimately familiar with the way the melody sounds and it's sinking into your subconscious. The second thing you'll want to do is narrow it down to just one version of Blue Bossa. And in this case, you want to go to the original version, which is the Kenny Dorham version of this tune. It comes from the Joe Henderson album. So go ahead and zoom right onto that one and start listening to that one over and over and over again, so that you're really intimately familiar with the way the melody is phrased off of that record. And then after you're really familiar with the tune, the next thing to do is to actually pull out your instrument and then slowly go along with the recording note by note and figuring out what it is on your instrument. You can definitely feel free to use slowdowners or even the slowdown feature on YouTube to slowly get that melody a little bit easier if you're not used to learning things by ear. But ultimately the end result is you'll be able to play the melody perfectly the way it was intended, and you're going to have memorized it for the long term. And by the way, I actually have a 4-step simple process for this that I go more in depth in my free guide called Learn Jazz Standards the Smart Way, so I'll leave a link to that for free in the description down below. Once you've got the melody, step number 2 is to learn the chord changes to Blue Bossa. Now, it doesn't matter if you're a guitar player, piano player, saxophone player, trumpet player, it's really all the same. You still have to learn the chords and understand what's going on. And for this step, it's kind of more advanced to learn it by ear, so I don't necessarily feel you have to do that. It's certainly not immediately, but the main important thing is, if you're learning it from a chord chart, is to memorize it. And one way to help you memorize it is to simply analyze it with Roman numerals. So take a look at this color-coded chords analysis. This is something we provide to our Inner Circle members in our Inner Circle membership. And we can see right away we're in the key of concert C minor, and our very first chord is C minor 7, right? Now the next chord we have is an F minor 7, right? And this is what we would call the 4 chord. It's the 4 chord in the key of concert C minor. If you're a little new to understanding how chord progressions work, please stick around to the end of the video and I'll share with you another one that's really going to help you understand how Roman numerals work and chord progressions work. Then we have this B flat 7, which by the way, a lot of people leave out when they learn this because sometimes it's not always included in the real book changes, which is why you have to be careful. And then we find one of the most important chord progressions in all of jazz, which is the minor 2, 5, 1, which in the key of C minor is D minor 7 flat 5, G7 to a C minor chord. Then we have a little twist and turn here, and we actually go into the key of D flat major, and we approach that by, again, one of the most important chord progressions in all of jazz, in this case, the major 2, 5, 1, which is E flat minor 7, A flat 7 to D flat major 7. And then we go ahead and jump right back into the key of C minor with the 2, 5, 1, and then a D minor 7, flat 5, G7 to turn around all the way back up to the top of the C minor 7. So looking at the Roman numerals again, we have a 1 chord, a 4 chord, we have a 7, we have a minor 2, 5, 1, a 2-5-1 in D flat major, a minor 2-5-1 in C minor, and just a turnaround to get us back up to the top for improvisation. Once you understand it in those terms, it's easier to actually go about memorizing it, and trust me, it's easier to start improvising over it because you start to understand the inner workings of Blue Bossa. One extra thing for the piano players and the guitarists is, of course, this is a bossa nova, so you're going to know a basic bossa nova comping pattern such as this one. By no means is that what João Gilberto is playing or any of the really good Brazilian bossa nova players. They're playing a lot of variations of that, but it's a basic pattern that will at least get you by. Now, the next thing you want to do in this learning the chords process is to actually go ahead and figure out what the actual chord tones are. And this is especially important if you are a horn player, obviously, but we want to look at what are the chord tones. So in the case of C minor, you're going to be playing a root, a flat 3, a 5, and a flat 7, right? So you can work through the chord changes this way through all of them. Just to get through it, but also keep in mind, we're actually preparing ourselves to start improvising, because when it comes to jazz, the foundational place to start your improvisations is with the chord tones. So if you know these chord tones inside and out throughout the entire jazz standard, it's going to be so much easier for you to start crafting a solo, because all you really have to do is start by thinking about what the chord tones are. So really focus first on the chord tones before even thinking about scales, before even thinking about licks or any of that other stuff. Get the foundational fundamentals down first, and you're going to be set up for success on Blue Bossa. Now, step number 3 is to isolate the chord progressions. Going back to our color-coded chords analysis, let's look at some of the chord progressions that come up here. So the most obvious ones that I talked about were the minor 2-5-1 in C minor and the major 2-5-1 in D flat major. But obviously we do have this 1 to 4 to 7 chord progression. And a common mistake that a lot of people make with practicing jazz improvisation is they kind of work on the whole tune as a whole. They put on a backing track they find online and just try to work through the entire thing. But instead, the better option to do is to isolate the chord progressions and work on those areas. So for example, we might want to just take this minor 2-5-1, since it's a huge part of Blue Bossa, and get really good at doing this. So what I can do is loop this over and over again and just start to experiment with what I can possibly play over top of these chord progressions. So let's get on this backing here. And here are the chords to Blue Bossa. And what I'm going to do is just start by only playing chord tones. And then I'll add some ornaments. Right? Then we can start going to more jazz language and things like that, but we don't actually even have to. We can be playing really simple stuff like maybe 1 or 2 notes per bar. So instead of making it a big scary thing to start improvising, think of it more as an experiment and just trying different things. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, Brent, there's that one part when you were improvising that sounded really a lot more like jazz. It wasn't just playing chord tones or a few notes at a time. So how do I actually start playing jazz lines like that? Well, In comes our next step. Step number 4 is to learn jazz language. When I talk about learning jazz language, I mean you're going to recordings of, for example, Blue Bossa, the Kenny Dorham recording, and you're looking for a 2-5-1 lick over top of that section that you think sounds good, a way that maybe Kenny Dorham or Joe Henderson played that 2-5-1. In other words, it's sort of like hearing a sentence being said from someone and you trying to copy that sentence so that you are essentially downloading some vocabulary that you can say and hopefully morph into your own adaptation later. You can also do this by learning etudes, which are composed solos. That's what we do in our Inner Circle membership, for example. But the most important thing is to find micro as in licks and macro as in full solos of information for you to learn and become your own. So take a look here at this minor 2-5-1 lick over C minor 7. Sounds like this. Again, really slow. And so I learned that from a recording just by ear, sort of a similar process as I taught you to learn the melody of Blue Bossa. And now I have something I can play. And that's just one idea now that I can maybe grab a concept from, or I can start recomposing to create variations of different ideas that actually come from me. And that's how we start figuring out the jazz language slowly but surely over top of a tune like Blue Bossa. By the way, we learn new tunes every single month like Blue Bossa in my Inner Circle membership. So if you're interested in doing that and getting help and doing it with thousands of other musicians just like you, find the link in the description. Now, I mentioned earlier that understanding chord progressions and how they work with Roman numerals is really helpful. So on the screen right now, I have every chord progression you need to know in jazz, and I go a little bit further into this concept. So click the video on the screen right now to check that one out. Make sure you like this video if you found it helpful, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next video. Cheers.